his wife. I'm sure you must play as well as that. Maybe you could teach me, Theodora asked. I'm quick at learning games. Oh dear, the doctor said, and Eleanor and Luke laughed. We'll do something else instead, Eleanor said. I can play bridge, she thought. I like apple pie with sour cream, and I drove here by myself. Backgammon, the doctor said with bitterness. I play a fair game of chess, Luke said to the doctor, who cheered at once. Theodora set her mouth stubbornly. I didn't suppose we came here to play games, she said. Relaxation, the doctor said vaguely, and Theodora turned with a sullen shrug and stared again into the fire. I'll get the chessmen if you'll tell me where, Luke said, and the doctor smiled. Better let me go, he said. I've studied a floor plan of the house, remember? If we let you go off wandering by yourself, we'd very likely never find you again. As the door closed behind him, Luke gave Theodora a quick, curious glance, and then came over to stand by Eleanor. You're not nervous, are you? Did that story frighten you? Eleanor shook her head emphatically, and Luke said, You looked pale. I probably ought to be in bed, Eleanor said. I'm not used to driving as far as I did today. Brandy, Luke said. It will make you sleep better. You too, he said to the back of Theodora's head. Thank you, Theodora said coldly, not turning. I rarely have trouble sleeping. Luke grinned knowingly at Eleanor, and then turned as the doctor opened the door. My wild imagination, the doctor said, setting down the chess set. What a house this is. Did something happen? Eleanor asked. The doctor shook his head. We probably ought to agree, now, not to wander around the house alone, he said. What happened? Eleanor asked. My own imagination, the doctor said firmly. This table all right, Luke? It's a lovely old chess set, Luke said. I wonder how the younger sister happened to overlook it. I can tell you one thing, the doctor said. If it was the younger sister sneaking around this house at night, she had nerves of iron. It watches, he added suddenly. The house, it watches every move you make. And then, my own imagination, of course. In the light of the fire, Theodora's face was stiff and sulky. She likes attention, Eleanor thought wisely, and without thinking, moved and sat on the floor beside Theodora. Behind her, she could hear the gentle sound of chessmen being set down on a board, and the comfortable small movements of Luke and the doctor taking each other's measure. And in the fire there were points of flame and little stirrings. She waited a minute for Theodora to speak, and then said agreeably, Still hard to believe you're really here. I had no idea it would be so dull, Theodora said. We'll find plenty to do in the morning, Eleanor said. At home, there would be people around and lots of talking and laughing tell, she thought, astonished at herself. That doesn't tell what it was like. Even if I wanted to tell, why am I talking? I'm terrible, aren't I? Theodora moved quickly and put her hand over Eleanor's. I sit here and grouch because there's nothing to amuse me. I'm very selfish. Tell me how horrible I am. And in the firelight, her eyes shone with delight. You're horrible, Eleanor said obediently. Theodora's hand on her own embarrassed her. She disliked being touched, and yet a small physical gesture seemed to be Theodora's chosen way of expressing contrition, or pleasure, or sympathy. I wonder if my fingernails are clean, Eleanor thought, and slid her hand away gently. I am horrible, Theodora said, good-humored again. I am horrible and beastly, and no one can stand me. There. Now, tell me about yourself. I'm horrible and beastly, and no one can stand me. Theodora laughed. Don't make fun. You're sweet and pleasant, and everyone likes you very much. Luke has fallen madly in love with you, and I am jealous. Now I want to know more about you. Did you really take care of your mother for many years? Yes, Eleanor said. Her fingernails were dirty, and her hand was badly shaped, and people made jokes about love because sometimes it was funny. 11 years until she died 3 months ago. Were you sorry when she died? Should I say how sorry I am? No, she wasn't very happy. And neither were you. And neither was I. But what about now? What did you do afterward when you were free at last? I sold the house, Eleanor said. My sister and I each took whatever we wanted from it, small things. There was really nothing much except little things my mother had saved. My father's watch and some old jewelry. Not at all like the Sisters of Hill House. And you sold everything else. Everything, just as soon as I could. And then, of course, you started a gay, mad fling that brought you inevitably to Hill House. Not exactly, Eleanor laughed. But all those wasted years, did you go on a cruise, look for exciting young men, buy new clothes? Unfortunately, Eleanor said dryly, there was not at all that much money. My sister put her share into the bank for her little girl's education. I did buy some clothes to come to Hill House. People like answering questions about themselves, she thought. What an odd pleasure it is. I would answer anything right now. What will you do when you go back? Do you have a job? No, was a little silence, and then Theodore laughed quickly and said, "No." "Sorry," Eleanor said, horribly embarrassed. "I didn't mean to be curious." "You're funny," Theodora said, and touched Eleanor's cheek with her finger. "There are lines by my eyes," Eleanor thought, and turned her face away from the fire. "Tell me where you live," Theodora said. Eleanor thought, looking down at her hands, which were badly shaped. "We could have afforded a laundress," she thought. "It wasn't fair. My hands are awful." "I have a little place of my own," she said slowly. "An apartment like yours, only I live alone. Smaller than yours, I'm sure. I'm still furnishing it, buying one thing at a time, to make sure I get everything absolutely right. White curtains." "I had to look for weeks before I found my little stone lions on each corner of the mantel. And I have a white cat, and my books and records and pictures. Everything has to be exactly the way I want it, because there's only me to use it. Once I had a blue cup with stars painted on the inside. When you look down into a cup of tea, it was full of stars. I want a cup like that. Maybe one will turn up someday in my shop," Theodora said. "Then I can send it to you. Someday you'll get a little package saying, 'To Eleanor with love from her friend Theodora,' and it will be a blue cup full of stars." "I would have stolen those gold-rimmed dishes," Eleanor said, laughing. "Mate," Luke said, and the doctor said, "Oh dear, oh dear." "Blind luck," Luke said cheerfully. "Have you ladies fallen asleep there by the fire?" "Just about," Theodora said. Luke came across the room and held out a hand to each of them to help them up, and Eleanor, moving awkwardly, almost fell. Theodora rose in a quick motion and stretched and yawned. "Theo is sleepy," she said. "I'll have to lead you upstairs," the doctor said. "Tomorrow we must really start to learn our way around. Luke, will you screen the fire?" "Had we better make sure that the doors are locked?" Luke asked. "I imagine that Mrs. Dudley locked the back door when she left, but what about the others?" "I hardly think we'll catch anyone breaking in," Theodora said. "Anyway, the little companion used to lock her doors, and what good did it do to her?" "Suppose we want to break out?" Eleanor asked. The doctor glanced quickly at Eleanor and then away. "I see no need for locking doors," he said quietly. "There is certainly not much danger of burglars from the village," Luke said. "In any case," the doctor said, "I will not sleep for an hour or so yet. At my age, an hour's reading before bedtime is essential, and I wisely brought Pamela with me. If any of you has trouble sleeping, I will read aloud to you. I never yet knew anyone who could not fall asleep with Richardson being read aloud to him." Talking quietly, he led them down the narrow hallway and through the great front hall and to the stairs. "I have often planned to try it on very small children," he went on. resist. Yellow, the doctor said, surprised. Pink, Luke said, with a dainty gesture of distaste. We're blue and green down here, Theodora said. I will be awake reading, the doctor said. I will leave my door ajar, so I will certainly hear any sound. Good night. Sleep well. Good night, Luke said. Good night, all. As she closed the door of the blue room behind her, Eleanor thought wearily that it might be the darkness and oppression of Hill House that tired her so. And then it no longer mattered. The blue bed was unbelievably soft. Odd, she thought sleepily, that the house should be so dreadful, and yet in many respects so physically comfortable. The soft bed, the pleasant lawn, the good fire, the cooking of Mrs. Dudley. The company too, she thought, and then thought, now I can think about them. I am all alone. Why is Luke here? But why am I here? Journey's end and lovers' meeting. They all saw that I was afraid. She shivered and sat up in bed to reach for the quilt at the foot. Then, half amused and half cold, she slipped out of bed and went, barefoot and silent, across the room to turn the key in the lock of the door. They won't know I locked it, she thought, and went hastily back to bed. With the quilt pulled up around her, she felt herself looking with quick apprehension at the window, shining palely in the darkness, and then at the door. I wish I had a sleeping pill to take, she thought, and looked again over her shoulder, compulsively at the window, and then again at the door, and thought, is it moving? But I locked it. Is it moving? I think, she decided concretely, that I would like this better if I had the blankets over my head. Hidden deep in the bed under the blankets, she giggled and was glad none of the others could hear her. In the city, she never slept with her head under the covers. I have come all this way today, she thought. Then she slept, secure. In the next room, Theodora slept, smiling, with her light on. Farther down the hall, the doctor, reading Pamela, lifted his head occasionally to listen, and once went to his door and stood for a minute, looking down the hall, before going back to his book. A nightlight shone at the top of the stairs, over the pool of blackness which was the hall. Luke slept. On his bedside table, a flashlight, and the lucky piece he always carried with him. Around them the house brooded, settling and stirring with a movement that was almost like a shudder. 6 miles away, Mrs. Dudley awakened, looked at her clock, thought of Hill House, and shut her eyes quickly. Mrs. Gloria Sanderson, who owned Hill House and lived 300 miles away from it, closed her detective story, yawned, and reached up to turn off her light, wondering briefly if she had remembered to put the chain on the front door. Theodora's friend slept, so did the doctor's wife and Eleanor's sister.